Nostalgia. Welcome to Irish Granny Tarot. This is video number 2, A Spy in Plain Sight. Just because I just read it doesn't remember I can remember what I've read. Okay, Chapter 8. Video 2, Chapter 8. The All-American Boy. Hanssen was born in Chicago, April 18th, 1944. The very beginning of the Cold War, in the middle of the Red Scare, spies figured heavily in popular culture. Knowledge was power. People were afraid of nuclear war. James Bond had his start. It was just in the zeitgeist. Schools did civil defense drills. I remember those. Hide under your desk so the nukes don't get you. In 1957, the book On the Beach came out by Neville Shute. Fabulous book if you haven't read it. All of Neville Shute's books are really good. They made a movie of it. In 1962 was the Cuban Missile Crisis, and a Soviet double agent told the British that the Russian missiles that they were so worried about in Cuba were not as long range as the Russians had pretended to be. It was less of a crisis than we realized. TV, interestingly enough, Hanssen's home, where he lived in Chicago, it was in the city of Chicago, but it was in an area that was very suburban. Very much like a TV sitcom and, a TV family. His life was no sitcom at all, but like a TV family. And people were in denial. The sitcoms reflect that of the time. There's no mention of the Soviet threat or the McCarthyism. His dad was a special Chicago cop who belonged to a unit hunting communists. His dad bet on the horses, and his dad was mean. He engaged in physical torture with Robert. So his mother says that Hanssen showed no emotion. His father would torture him, and he would show no emotion. He would go to his room and read superhero comics. And he starts getting interested in espionage around this time, reading books about it. His best friend Jack said that Hanssen didn't talk about his father at all, and his father did not talk to Jack ever when Jack went to the house. There were no visible wounds, and Jack was unaware of all of this for a very long time, even though he was his best friend. I remember one time we were cruising around in my car and I got pulled over by some cops. This is Jack speaking. The guy's looking at my driver's license and saying, "What are you doing cruising around here?" Giving him a hard time, that kind of thing. Hanssen, Bob, got out of the car, went back and talked to the other cop, and the cop Bob was talking to hollered up to my cop and said, "Hey, this guy's dad is Howard Hanssen. He's a good guy. Let the kid go." So he had juice. He was very close to his grandmother. She lived upstairs in their house, and he, even in college, and this is too much. When he was in college, he mailed his dirty laundry home for his grandmother to wash for him and mail back. His dad liked to publicly humiliate him and taunt him and put him down and ridicule him, always telling him in front of people, "You'll never amount to anything." His dad arranged through the cops for Hanssen to fail his driver's license the first time he took the test. When Hanssen was arrested, Jack's mother said, as soon as she heard it, "Oh, that's his father," meaning Hanssen's deception and tyranny and treachery was his father's fault. Hanssen read My Silent War by Kim Philby, a memoir of a British intelligence spy for the KGB. And like Philby, Hanssen asked the Russians to arrange an escape route to Moscow using bank accounts from the Russians. And by the time this was all over and he was arrested, he purportedly had $800,000 in Russian banks. He got into spy literature from a very early age. He was into James Bond in a big way. He later had 14 guns in his house, including an Uzi. He was a ham radio geek. He was nerdy, creepy. Girls thought he was really strange. Also, I don't think I mentioned this. I think he was 6'5". So here's a story from a friend. The event nearly everyone familiar with Hanssen in those early years agrees is formative happens in 6th grade. During the school day, his close friend, Paul Steinbachner, gets knocked down by a ball in a playground game. Normal recess mayhem. That afternoon, when Hanssen goes over to Paul's house to play, his friend complains of a headache. He goes into the bathroom and minutes later drops dead of a brain hemorrhage, and Hanssen heard him hit the ground. As a teen, he liked to race cars on windy roads, race other kids in cars. He was reckless. He shot a gun in the basement of his friend's house. He shot from his back deck. He didn't care if it hurt other people. His college yearbook, only under his picture, says intramurals. That's it. Nobody from college knew him well. The only thing that's remembered about him in college is he walked out of the final for Western Civ because he didn't like the first question. He was in the habit, he didn't care what result he got because he was in the habit of breaking into the school offices at night and changing his grades in college. His father wanted him to be a dentist, so he went to dental school. And they all claimed that he wore this black suit 24/7, even when dissecting cadavers, and the suit smelled. His roommate had to make him hang it outside or get it cleaned. One day, in a big lecture on tooth structure, he wrote the word bicuspid on his paper, taking notes, and then proceeded to draw a nude woman. The professor walked around the room as he was talking. It was hard for him to miss Bob's naked lady. He came over to Bob's desk and just lost it. He began reaming Bob out. It was something about how Northwestern was a professional school, the dental school, and how he was lucky to get in. Bob sat there, and I could see Bob was pissed off. Finally, Bob could not take it anymore and interrupted the professor's tirade. He told the professor he had accused him of not listening and didn't appreciate it. He said, "Why don't you go back up to the front of the class and start over, and I'll pick it up from there." When the professor began, Bob interrupted and began repeating his lecture word for word. It was like he had a tape recorder in his brain. Afterwards, he told his friend, "I can remember every conversation I have ever had." He got a summer job at a psychiatric hospital where he proceeded to manipulate the patients, like sit and pretend to be a psychiatrist and let them talk and talk and talk and manipulate them psychologically. He met Bonnie, his future wife, who was a student at Loyola doing a summer nurse thing. He would amuse the staff on the weekends by pretending he was a doctor, interviewing the patients. But he did impress Bonnie, and he impressed her family, and he was impressed by their prestigious lifestyle. They were big shots. After 2 years, Bonnie and Robert were married in 1968. He was 24, she was 21. He dropped out of dental school in 1969 and went into the MBA program and became an auditor. His parents retired to Florida, and as soon as they left, Hanssen became a Chicago cop. He became an undercover anti-communist cop and an internal mole. Nobody liked him. He watched other cops, spies, stoolies. He was trained to install and use high-tech surveillance equipment. His boss said he was brilliant. He looked like an altar boy, and I thought he would be a spy for the brass, and I kept him on a short leash. It's very interesting. They even began to think in the Chicago police that maybe Hanssen was a spy for the feds. His boss got rid of him by suggesting that he apply to the FBI. The fox in the hen house. Chapter 9. Black is white, good is evil. So here are the the sides of Hanssen: member of Opus Dei, devout Catholic, FBI agent, loyal husband and father, spy for the Russians, nerdy computer tech. James Bamford should be the best one to talk to integrate these different sides. He was a documentarian who spent 4 decades studying American intelligence. He wrote the book The Puzzle Palace in 1982, which is considered the gold standard on U.S. intelligence. He's written several other books. In 2014, he spent 3 days in Moscow with the NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden. He's met and interviewed and filmed many top spies and their handlers. He has a yacht called the Safe House, and he travels globally in his yacht. He spoke to Hanssen in 1992. They were introduced while Bamford was working on a book, his second NSA book. And he was introduced by his friend in the CIA, a guy called Bart Baraska, because Hanssen was an FBI chief and a Russian spy expert. Bamford was interested, and in New York Times in 2001, he said Hanssen was different. So this is an interview he gave to the Times after his arrest. He was different. He talked immorality, of abortion. He talked the dangers of Planned Parenthood. He was old school. He revered J. Edgar Hoover. He was an anti-communist like it was the 1950s. He spoke of the dangers of Russian subversion. Bamford got close to Hanssen in 1990s. Hanssen had a big title, but he had very little actual work to do. It's interesting. Bamford interviewed Victor Cherkassin, which was Hanssen's handler, and he also interviewed Hanssen, and he was hungry for information. Bamford did not know that he was the handler at that time. If Cherkassin had been flipped, he would have been a very serious threat to Hanssen. Bamford also did interviews with Felix Bloch. He was a Foreign Service officer and most probable spy to Russia who got enough warning to cover his tracks and was never arrested. Hanssen was the guy who warned the KGB that they were looking at Bloch, and the KGB was able to warn Bloch and help him get his tracks covered. Bamford was shocked when Hanssen was revealed to be gray suit. Hanssen was pals with Bart Baraska. They had a lot in common. They were both in Opus Dei. Hanssen claims that he claimed to Baraska, bragged to Baraska, that he was surveilling Bill Clinton, that he had personally bugged the White House. He had made offers to Baraska to let him hear these conversations from the White House, and Baraska was very soon advised by the CIA, by the attorney that he talked to drop Hanssen. He cut off associations with him. Baraska died of cancer at the age of 49. Hanssen told Jack that he was the leading operator in the operation to bug Clinton. Hanssen searches the FBI files for any dirt he can find on Hillary and Chelsea every chance he gets. Bamford says Hanssen couldn't stop talking about religion, that he has a big old crucifix hung behind his desk, and if you sat in his desk in the State Department office, you had no choice but to stare at this thing. He joined the Right to Life rallies when he was in Washington. He was always talking about Opus Dei. He dragged Bamford to an Opus Dei meeting. This is the documentarian. And Bamford felt that Hanssen's faith was sincere, but that all of this stuff was compartmentalized. Hanssen seemed to be two people, the patriotic religious American and the spy of the century. His co-worker Jim Olsen said that he tried to get him interested in Opus Dei. He spoke with Hanssen about the debate around the nominations of Ashcroft as Attorney General. People were arguing, this seems like another planet. Wasn't Ashcroft too fundamentalist religious for the job of Attorney General? Hanssen predicted that a belief in God would someday be the ultimate hate crime, that victimization of Christians thing. Quote, "When the Lord comes, will there be any faith left in the world?" Hanssen asked. But he sold secrets to Russia for years despite his oath to God to keep it a sacred trust. His FBI boss, who was the only one in the FBI that was close to him as a sort of mentor, was David Major, we mentioned earlier. And he admits that Hanssen betrayed every single thing that he told Hanssen to the Russians. However, Major brags that Hanssen called Major the smartest counterintelligence officer in the FBI. And Majors act like this is a big compliment. His best friend Jack was the attaché at the American Embassy in Bonn. He was a civil servant. Hanssen put his name, Jack's name, on the top of a list that he gave to the Soviets of possible Americans to recruit for KGB moles. "As a Christian and his friend, I feel it's my job to forgive him," says Jack. It's water under the bridge. Hanssen used every relationship. Every relationship was transactional and on the edge of betrayal. For example, he intentionally befriended and groomed clerks and analysts under him so he could use them to get access to information. He went to gentlemen's clubs for lunch every day, and one day met Priscilla Gailey, a stripper. She was new. He sent her a $10 bill to her dressing room with his card, and backstage to her dressing room, and he told her that he was an unofficial FBI business in the strip club. This made him feel cool. Jack says that he went to many strip clubs, and he did it often, that Priscilla had lunch with him, and the relationship progressed. He paid $2,000 for her to get teeth. He bought her expensive jewelry. He flew her to Hong Kong and put her up in a hotel separately when he was on FBI business in 1991. They were there for 2.5 weeks in separate hotels. He gave her $1,000 cash back in D.C. He bought her a $10,000 Mercedes and gave her an American Express card to maintain the Mercedes. He schooled her. She was sort of his Liza Doolittle. He sent her to art museums and told her what to look for. He wanted her to focus on religious art. He got her to buy expensive shoes, to change her pronunciation of things, Pygmalion. Hanssen planned to set her up in an apartment near the Soviet embassy, and the Russians said, no. So after the second year of them being together, Gailey went home for a visit to Ohio and used the American Express card for gifts, not just her car. And after Hanssen found out that he'd spent over $85,000 on her in total, and yet she wasn't doing what he told her to do, he freaked out and dropped her like a hot potato. Gailey got into coke and then into prostitution. She wrecked her Mercedes. She sold her jewelry. She sold the computer he gave her. She lost her teeth on a binge. She did a year in jail. He ignored her pleas for help and said she made her bed, ... like she had never really existed in his life. Is this the story of love and rescue, or of control and the puppet master? He played control games with Bonnie. For example, he would stare into his empty coffee cup until she realized and jumped up to refill it. He would slowly, this is just diabolical, they'd be at the table, and he did this over and over and over. He would slowly tip over a water glass to train her to catch it before it spilled. He didn't tell her that's what he was doing. She had to notice, and then she had to anticipate, and she had to always be on edge. Bonnie shared his very polarized worldview, good versus evil, religious versus liberal. It was a mortal combat. And the conservatives were at war with liberals for the soul of the nation. He uses his insider status to reinforce her us versus them worldview. He'd tell her things from the FBI to get her to believe that that's what was really happening. Oh, he told her that Clinton won because his campaign was financed by gold that was stolen from the Russians. Eventually became Trump's deep state. Only Hanssen can keep her safe from the Satan in the world. Bonnie doesn't know, but he makes her a porn star behind her back. He posts descriptions of their sex life on the internet on a bulletin board, including descriptions of going to the beach with her and forcing her to be exposed on the beach. He describes sex in the VW before they got married. He described her as liking the risk of being seen, and he liked other men seeing them do stuff. Bonnie was shocked when all these posts were later revealed. She was shocked he used her name, but here's even worse, if you can believe. I mean, this is really creepy. In 1970, his best friend Jack was in Vietnam. He got a package of photos of Bonnie, and he thought, Hanssen must have made a mistake. Why did you send me these pictures? Until Hanssen writes back and said, you got the package. Then, when Hanssen heard that Jack was developing how to develop film, he sent him negatives of a naked Bonnie. And at his house one day, Hanssen took Jack in to spy on Bonnie in the shower, unbeknownst to her. And when Jack was staying at the house, Hanssen set him up for Jack to be able to spy on their sex life at night. Later, Hanssen set up closed-circuit TV in the house so Jack could watch from remote. Jack says Hanssen insisted that he be a voyeur. Hanssen suggested a date rape drug so that Jack could join in. He claims he didn't take him up on it. Hanssen, did he orchestrate this marriage? Did he have any feelings for her at all? Did he orchestrate this to get into the Opus Dei and into the FBI? Was it a means to an end? Did he plan on becoming a spy? Was this all long-term plan? Did he manipulate relationships at work, friendly and distant, to best position himself as a spy? Jim Olsen says that Hanssen was real good at faking emotions when in fact he had no emotions. Part 3, Chapter 10, Trust Me. Hanssen used his knowledge of the FBI against the FBI when he was spying. For example, FBI saying, Soviets don't use dead drops on Mondays. So knowing that the Soviets did not use those dead drops, Hanssen used that information to do it on Mondays. Because they wouldn't be monitored. He used the Russians that he knew weren't monitored to contact his handler. He was very careful about that. And he knew they weren't being monitored because he had FBI access. He took advantage of the culture of trust in the FBI, which we'll talk about later. And they were all vetted, and they took an oath, and then they were trusted. And he played on that. The FBI simply could not imagine that one of their own would betray the FBI. The FBI lacked the ability to know what it knew because it did not use the information on their own systems. They didn't even check. They had the information, they just didn't even bother to check. The Bureau tried to profile a spy personality and couldn't because they're all different, and we'll talk about that more. Too many motives and too many responses to a pressure at play. Money, ego, hate, thrill, all these different reasons. They claim they could not have known it was Robert Hanssen. Plus, the FBI is very arrogant about its culture of trust. It's called hubris. They should always assume that there are spies and maintain strict compartmentalization within the organization. And internal access to knowledge should be shut down. Too many people without a need to know. The FBI was too casual about sharing with each other that trust thing, and guys like Hanssen took advantage of it. Hanssen never in 25 years of his career was asked to give a polygraph, despite all of his broad access to really sensitive information, which is sort of astounding. In the CIA, they polygraph everybody on a regular basis. This began after World War II. They also do it for contractors, and they do it every 5 years. The FBI did not start polygraphy until 1978, and then only for suspects in criminal cases. By the mid-'80s, they did it for agents in sensitive positions like Hanssen, but they never got around to testing Hanssen. After Aldrich Ames was arrested in 1994, the FBI intelligence recommended random polygraphy, but senior management rejected the idea. Finally, it instituted new recruits were polygraphed. But this happened 18 years after Hanssen joined and 13 years after he started being a spy. He also didn't ever have to file detailed financial disclosure forms. Ames' spending Ames' spending tipped off the CIA. He overspent. He used cash for a house and a car and a home renovation, all of it more than his normal CIA salary would allow. Now, I had a piece of paper fall out of my notes, but it's only one page off, and it's not going to hurt the narrative. We talked about the FBI's culture of trust. It was its strength, but it was also its Achilles heel. Hanssen was an astounding failure of security, and he took great advantage of being one of the few in the Bureau who understood computers. He could surveil and investigate and look at operations completely unseen because nobody else knew how to do the computers. He could put information on a disk, which was easy to conceal, and nobody would be the wiser. He only stole what he had access to, but he had so much access, he didn't have to get into places where he shouldn't be. He didn't have to look at information he did not already have permission to look at. When he resumed his mole work in earnest after a year's detail to the inspector's staff in 1991, he grabbed the first thing I could lay my hands on, he says in his cover note to the KGB. In this case, the first things lying around are almost 300 pages of information invaluable to the enemy. Imagine what Hanssen might find if he really worked at it. There were secrets everywhere in the FBI lying around. The numbers are incredible. The office of the headquarters is considered a secure area where classified material can be stored and moved around with impunity. The hottest secrets are stored in SCIFs, sensitive, compartmented information facilities. But they're often lax about it, and this is a benefit to any agent with clearance. It prevents them having to go through rigmarole to get in and out. It's called open storage. And even non-bureau contractors in the facility can get peeks at classified documents that are lying around for collection or removal. People who shouldn't see things are able to see things without even having to try. In Hanssen's words, you could bring documents out of FBI headquarters without ever having a risk of being searched or looked at or even concerned about. FBI uniformed security police who provide the primary line of defense against unauthorized entry at headquarters and other facilities are understaffed, insufficiently trained, and ill-equipped to deter improper removal of classified material. The authority of these officers is undercut by providing FBI executives with gold badges that allow them and visitors they escort to bypass normal security, and executive escorted visitor badges that allow uncleared visitors repeated escorted access. In short, come and get it. Later, the Inspector General finds that Hanssen had access, and it was rarely monitored and lightly supervised, with little or no fear of leaving with sensitive information being stopped. He hauled out a volume of top-secret nuclear response plans, took them to his car, photographed the entire thing in the back seat of his car, and carried it back into the office. He even gave Soviets originals, and eventually they returned it, and he put them back. From 85 to 91, he gave more than 6,000 pages of documents, top secret, to the Russians. Half were actual paper documents, half on disks. Most were Xeroxed on FBI machines that didn't have page counters. When the Internet was set up in 1995, intranet, most managers didn't trust it, and they continued to use paper documents, which helped Hanssen. Only he could be able to see, only he could use the intranet properly and be able to see what the FBI knew about what he was up to. So the FBI never did a budget review, like personal spending thing on Hanssen. And as a result, they never saw the money that he had that was growing in his bank account that did not come from being paid by the FBI. He was able to send all 5 of his children to private schools and to university and pay for it. He says he's a sharp investor and he had a family inheritance. Nobody investigated it. In 1995, there was a State Department liaison. He was a State Department liaison. The FBI wanted to ignore him. He was too weird, so they farmed him out to the State Department. So for 6 years, he worked there with no supervisor, access to files. He didn't have to do any reports. He didn't have any performance reviews, and there was no background investigation of him. It was a haphazard sham. The investigators that did exist were retired FBI agents on contract using formats from J. Edgar Hoover's time, and it's a rote format, and they were called autopilot reports. They would ask one question: did you ever break any laws? Instead of going through everything and investigating everything. And then they would stick them in their files and they'd get lost in the file. And even though his analysis, when they did look at him, was less than stellar, nobody pursued it. It was so superficial. As Hanssen amped up his spying from 1994 to 2000, the FBI cut personnel to the Security Countermeasures Branch by 18%. 6 months after his arrest, 0.6% of the staff on the FBI were involved in maintaining security. 0.6%. Jim Olson, who headed security and granted clearances, says that polygraphs create an organization full of cookie-cutter people. He doesn't like it because they mute creativity and they erode trust. Plus, they're not 100% reliable, and that is true. They don't use them in court for a reason. And in fact, some psychopaths pass polygraphs because they don't elicit the fear, the emotion, the adrenaline, the nerves, the galvanic skin response that you're supposed to get when you lie. They don't care. They lie with impunity. Doesn't show up on a polygraph. The American Academy of Sciences say that polygraphs are high-tech voodoo. Here's my little bit of advice from you, from my obsession with true crime. Innocent or not, guilty or not, embarrassed by the law enforcement implying that you must have something to hide. If you ever get arrested, the only word you say is lawyer, and you refuse a polygraph. Period. Trust me on this. I'll send a bill. Anyway, they're voodoo, high-tech voodoo. And the results are inadmissible in court. And they did use these polygraphs in the CIA, but they were not so successful for the CIA. Many, many people failed them who were not spies, and that stalled clearances for longtime faithful employees and broke trust. The FBI even asked Hanssen to make a list of possible people who could be maybe Gray Suit the Mole. So he did. He made them a big long list, and it went in a direction that led them far away from him. The Inspector General showed the FBI had an inability to account for many sensitive documents. It had a failure to limit access to the need-to-know notion, that it had a culture of trust that made it so easy for Hanssen, and it made him harder to find. It was almost impossible to determine who had access to all this information. It was the perfect spy environment because the information was everywhere. And there was no tracking him. He was too clever. Chapter 11, Puffs of Smoke. August 23rd, 1988, Clyde Conrad Jr. was arrested in West Germany for treason and espionage. He was in the military, for selling U.S. military secrets to Hungarian and Czechoslovakian intelligence. And they were passing them on to the Soviets. And he got a life sentence. This led to the arrest of Rod Ramsey, and he got 36 years. And this spy ring gave the Soviets the U.S. nuclear codes. Hanssen one day showed the chief of the Eurasian section that computer information was not secure. And the chief got mad at Hanssen for accessing this information because he didn't have permission to access it. And there was a big blow up about it. And Hanssen's excuse was, well, I'm trying to help you guys and show you, because I understand the computers and you don't. I'm trying to show you the weakness or lack of security. And this makes Hanssen look like a good guy, protecting information. It's very calculated. Later, they realized that Hanssen did this to be able to get into the system and check on what they knew about him, the gray suit. And to find out if they had tracking software so that would it be safe for him to continue to use the computers. When Hanssen was caught tracking another guy's computer, he was told it wasn't right and that he should go report himself to the section chief. He never did. It's the honor system, right? He never did. Mike Rocheford, the guy who recruits around the globe for the CIA, MAGA, says that Hanssen was the thing about Hanssen was discussed, and but then dropped because it took too much initiative to pursue. His boss, David Majors, says that Hanssen warned them early and often that the system wasn't secure. Was this a real concern, or was he proving how smart he was, or was he covering his ass? Hanssen halted spying when Russia fell because he wasn't sure what was going to be safe and what wasn't going to be safe, and he waited until 1993 to start again. He was almost caught when he approached the GRU, the military intelligence guy, in D.C., and wanted to talk about politics in the new Russia. And the GRU told the Americans, this FBI guy was talking to us. But they didn't have identifying information about him. They couldn't tell him his name. And they didn't know that he had computer ability. And they weren't able to even find out, the guys at the FBI weren't even able to look on their computers and see who amongst us got the address for this GRU guy. They never knew. Hanssen would have been the one who would be able to look up who was looking up the guy Hanssen spoke to. The Inspector General in 2003 said that Hanssen was no master spy. He was reckless, but the FBI had a long-standing system of problems with security and hubris, and that worked in Hanssen's favor. And it wasn't because Hanssen was a genius, because he wasn't. He was reckless. And that, we'll later learn, is part of his psychopathy. In our review, we observed serious deficiencies in nearly every aspect of the FBI's internal security program, from personnel security to computer security, document security, security training, and compliance. These deficiencies led to the absence of effective deterrence to espionage at the FBI and undermined the FBI's ability to detect an FBI mole. Moreover, the absence of deterrence played a significant role in Hanssen's decision to commit espionage. As he explained during debriefings, this is Hanssen speaking, "If I had thought that the risk of detection was great, I would never have done it." He exploited these weaknesses, particularly in document and computer security, to pass sensitive information to the KGB. Any complaints about Hanssen's lax use of security were written off as, oh, he's a space cadet, oh, he's goofy, oh, he's just trying to help. Hanssen inquired about a new position with the National Counterintelligence Center, a joint FBI-CIA group, but you needed to be polygraphed for it, and he changed his mind and took the State Department job instead. Chapter 12, do you think Bob could be a KGB agent? August of 90, Hanssen has way too much cash. He tells Bonnie, do not use the credit cards. Use cash. Only pay in cash. He uses his mother to launder the money. She doesn't know that's what he's doing. He uses regular savings deposits, and the Bank Secrecy Act mandates that they file a report of any kind of activity of $10,000 or more in the bank. And so he can't just put it in the bank. So he's in what's called a success trap. In August, they made a visit. They had a visit in Washington, D.C. of Bonnie's family, her brother Mark and his family, her other brother, and their sister Jean. And they all got together. After this visit, Mark's wife, Mary Ellen, reported a conversation with Jean. Bonnie had told Jean, so she's telling her sister, that she found $5,000 cash in Hanssen's sock drawer. Also, that he had been buying Bonnie expensive jewelry. And the sister Jean and Mary Ellen and Mark all wanted to know what money, where did he get the money. After his arrest, Bonnie doesn't remember this. Can't remember. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's got that selective memory loss. It's a sad disorder. The older brother, who is a postal inspector, asks, do you think Bob could be KGB? And they all admit they could imagine it. Mark, the brother, also remembers a phone call from Bonnie to say congratulations for getting into the Monterey Language School for Polish. He was going to learn Polish for the FBI. And Bonnie says to her brother, Bob says we may retire to Poland someday. And Mark was like, what? That's bizarre. Well, the Pope's Polish. Maybe it's all about that. Mark begins to hear rumors about a hunt for a mole. He decides to take the concerns he has to a guy that he knew that was high up in the Russian program, but not his direct supervisor. This was a delicate situation. He was trying to keep it on the down low. So he goes to this guy, Jim Lyle, who was in the Chicago field office in high up position in Russian unit. Lyle is not impressed by this story. This is the story later. Lyle told him he wasn't impressed, says Mark. However, Lyle told Mark he would look into it. Mark felt it would be handled. He'd done what he was supposed to do. Now, Lyle has a whole different version. He says, I was his boss. He did go to his boss. He describes the room as a different kind of room entirely. He describes the year as a different year. He said the amount of money that was hidden in the sock drawer was $3,000, not $5,000. Lyle says he didn't know there was a mole hunt. Mark told him. Lyle says he didn't think it was odd that Hanssen had a friendship with Shemov, who was a defector. He's an FBI agent, and he's hanging out with Soviet defectors. Lyle denied that he ever said he would investigate. He says that Mark just asked my opinion, and I said I didn't have an opinion. Both accuse the other of retroactive ass covering. Chapter 13, Sumo Wrestling. The day after Hanssen's arrest, Greg, Bonnie's older brother, tells Mark that he wasn't surprised. Lots of people in the FBI were shocked, but they weren't shocked it was Hanssen. They were shocked it was the FBI and not the CIA who had the mole. I.C. Smith says that when Hanssen was at a meeting, Smith would not talk about anything sensitive because he had no need to know and he didn't trust Hanssen. Other agents say the same thing. Quote, we didn't trust Hanssen, not because we thought he was a spy, but because he was so indiscreet. We just simply did not have trust in him. In 1993, Hanssen was the chief of FBI National Security Threat List Unit in the intelligence branch at headquarters. Sounds like a big job. But it was very lightly staffed and not had a lot of work to do. So here's the story. There was a clerical worker named Kimberly Lichtenberg, And she said that Hanssen always gave her the creeps. He was handsy. He exhibited predatory office behavior. One day, he called her and another one into the office about an issue. It was right before she had to leave to catch her train. So train, subway, whatever. And, carpool. And he had no legitimate reason to keep her. And she said, listen, I'm late. I have to go catch my car. She was polite, I have to go get my carpool. If I don't do it now, I'm stuck in town overnight. I have to get out of here. And, I don't know anything. I know nothing about what you're asking me about. So she turns around to leave, and he ran after her, grabbed her, knocked her down, and dragged her back into the office. Dragged her lying on the floor back into the office. So she got to her feet, hit him in the chest, and ran out to the carpool. She says this should have been a reason for him to be dismissed immediately. This is assault. She had bruises, photographed. She was interviewed by the FBI. There were witnesses who were interviewed, and nothing comes of it. So she went to the DC cops and filed assault. And the cops told her, well, we can't take this case because it's an FBI matter. The FBI pressured the witnesses to change their story. David Majors says, it was a he said, she said. He had seen them on the floor. He was in the office. He said they were both guilty of something. He said, she said, brushed it off. Hanssen was suspended 5 days without pay. And essentially it was the end of his professional career. He would never be promoted to anything important ever again. He would continue to languish in mediocrity. She filed a civil complaint for $1.36 million for assault and battery. The Department of Justice defended him and argued that he was within the scope of his authority to manhandle her. The FBI was too outward directed about this whole spy thing. They were full of prosecutors and crime fighters in their background, especially at the top. Mueller, Free, Sessions, Webster, all the judges. They simply failed to have the imagination to think it could possibly be an FBI agent. They were focused on traditional crimes and bagging the perps. And that was the best pathway to promotion in the FBI. And so classified information was low-hanging fruit. The FBI had no capacity to investigate itself and often no incentive to investigate itself, especially the Soviet Union because the Russia problem was the biggest threat, and the unit got most of the money and had the biggest ego. Hanssen got away with assault because of cronyism in the Soviet Union. They were just too smug, hubris. Part 4, Chapter 14, The Vault People. Martinov, or Pimenta, who was considered such a nice guy, had become a spy because he was sick of the regime in Russia, and he didn't let his son get the medicine he needed, and he lost his hearing. So he's this military higher-up, and Russia is in such a mess that when his son gets a series of ear infections, he can't get the medication, the antibiotics, and his son goes deaf. And he gets sent to the United States and becomes a spy for the United States. So he's the one who Hanssen tattled on, and he was ordered to escort Yurchenko back to the U.S. Yurchenko was the journalist in San Francisco who worked for TASS, who got in trouble. And the U.S. was concerned and they were afraid that they were acting on Hanssen's tip. The KGB arrested him on arrival, and the U.S. was concerned. This guy knows a lot. Now he's been arrested. They didn't know Hanssen was involved, but they're acting on Hanssen's tip. Then the Russians tell his wife, the Russian spy, tell his wife that he's hurt himself back home in Russia, and she and the children have to rush back to be with him. And then she is brutally interrogated, and he is executed. Eventually, the FBI manages to find money for the family to relocate to the U.S., the one and only time this has ever been done. They liked him so much, and they felt so terrible about the situation. By this time, 1986, they realize that assets are disappearing. So they create a group called The Vault. They actually have a soundproof, bug-proof cement room beside an elevator. It's a secure room. Only people with need to know are allowed. They keep a strict chain of command. A guy called Tim Caruso is the head. They review every Soviet case, and they realize that the CIA is also involved in all the FBI assumed mole cases. So they're thinking, then the mole is the CIA. So they redid security, and they rehandled the processes for sensitive information, that there were too many violations of the need-to-know policy. The FBI vault determined that the mole was not in the FBI. There was no evidence of that. However, all the evidentiary trails had been obliterated by poor processes. There was no way to trace any evidence of interference because everything was just lying around. And Hanssen knew how to jimmy the computers. So 2 internal studies got nowhere. The FBI blamed the CIA. And meanwhile, Hanssen leaked information and raked in the money. There was a joint special investigation unit, the SIU, that was formed. The FBI formed a new squad to follow the leads that the joint unit found. This squad languished and failed because they got no information. The Special Investigation Unit made a list of 40 CIA people and decided that Americans' mole had to be in the CIA. The list had no FBI employees on it and recommended no action. In 2003, the Department of Justice did a report on this and said that there was no cooperation with the CIA and that the investigation was inattentive to the FBI. David Majors criticized the Investigator General's report. He said it was second-guessing and it implied, what does a young DOJ lawyer know about espionage? Thompson, who was on the vault team, knew Hanssen, said he was an odd duck, called him Lurch. And he said the crucifix was weird, but you could always talk to him. And after the vault, Thompson went to another job that required that he talk to Hanssen every couple of weeks. And he said that he noticed that Thompson, previous to being in the vault, he got along with Hanssen. Hanssen knew that Thompson was a member of the vault. When Thompson moved from the vault into this other job, he talked to Hanssen every couple of weeks at work, part of his job. And he said that Hanssen's demeanor towards me changed. He was never affable after that. He would intentionally mumble. I couldn't hear him. I had a hard time hearing, and I always cut those visits short, and he thinks that's intentional. Hanssen and Ames were working around the same time period, 85 to 91, and had the same Russian handler, Cherkashin, for the KGB. Both were caught by their wives doing something illicit, spying, and told the same lie. Oh, I'm conning the Russians on behalf of the U.S. Both had a contempt for the security system, that it could never catch them. It was so inadequate. Ames had more money in a shorter period of career spying, and he compromised fewer operations. Hanssen knew the best way to catch a spy was with a spy, and with spy techniques, and so he placed himself in the best possible situation to see if he was being watched. Ames chose a flamboyant lifestyle, and Hanssen chose a religious family man lifestyle. He made small extravagances. For example, Bonnie gave him a $7,500 Rolex, and he gave it to his friend Jack. Jack didn't want it, but Hanssen insisted. He didn't have a splashy lifestyle. He paid for school tuition, and his American dream was basically paid for by the KGB. He talked about investing in diamonds, and he tells the KGB that he would like an escape plan and maybe come to Russia when he retires to be a lecturer. He got a $24,000 diamond from the KGB, then ended up with a total of $54,000 worth of diamonds, but it was too risky to sell them, and he ended up giving them back and asking for money, which was lucky because at that time the FBI heard a rumor that the defector was a mole and was being paid in diamonds, and they went with photographs to the diamond district and showed pictures of all their suspects to the diamond merchants. However, they were all pictures of CIA officers. If the KGB said that Ames, if the KGB paid Ames with a diamond, Ames would have made it into a ring. That's a quote. Sandy Grimes, a CIA friend of Ames, said Ames was a nice guy until he returned from Rome in 1989. He came with fancy suits, fancy shoes, new teeth, and he exuded arrogance. Also, he was a drunk. Hanssen's vices were secret until he was arrested. Ames did come out of Rome with an alcohol problem. He worked with the CIA from 52 to 67. And he had gotten summer jobs as a kid with the CIA because of his dad. And then he became a clerk typist while he was at George Washington University, and then he became a CIA officer. In 85, he went to the Soviet Union embassy and applied to be a KGB spy. Ames had many alcohol-related problems: DUIs, public intoxication, too drunk at CIA office parties, caught at office party with a female employee, got into an argument with a Cuban officer at the embassy in Mexico City. He had an accident. He missed meetings. He left his briefcase with secrets on it on the subway on the way to a meeting with the Soviets. A Soviet asset. He left his badge at FBI CIA ball game with cryptic notes, a wallet, and his alias ID. But in his reports, all it said was he was a binge drinker, that there was a pattern of benign neglect about his behavior. His bosses were aware, but they did nothing. He failed his polygraph test. He talked his way out of failing it. Explained it away. Hanssen also was enabled. Exceptions were made for him. And both had... It's remarkable because both had access to all kinds of secrets. Both have peculiarities that would block advancement to higher levels in their job. Ames' second wife was a Colombian and her family was from Medellin, but that wasn't pursued in his background checks. In 85, an official duty American went to the Soviet embassy to meet with a specialist. It was protocol, but he left a message for Cherkashin. So Ames is doing this. He left a message that he wanted to be a KGB mole. So he was there officially on CIA business. It was protocol. But he also left this message, secret message, he wanted to be a KGB mole. And he offered a couple of names of flipped Soviets as a goodwill gesture. And he didn't hide from the Russians who he was or that he was CIA. He spent a year in Rome, and while recruiting Soviets, he sold secrets. It was the perfect cover. So his job for the CIA was to find Soviets to turn. But he was selling secrets to them instead. He was drunk at work 3 times a week. He had a fancy lifestyle. Swiss bank accounts. The CIA and the FBI were visibly being compromised. Hanssen was going under the radar. He was weird and a religious family man, but Ames was a sitting duck, supposedly. A drunk with access to top secrets, meeting regularly with Soviets, supposedly courting them to be moles. But he has not gotten one polygraph that he didn't talk his way out of. He was turned in by a fellow employee, and the CIA did nothing. They even expanded his computer access. You have to wonder about this. Finally, the CIA wises up, and they got into his bank accounts, and they figured it out, and he was arrested in 1994 and was sent to prison, federal prison, for life. And I'm going to stop here. That's the end of number 2. And we will begin video number 3 here in just a second. Thank you for watching. I hope you're liking this story. It's unbelievable.